Hello and welcome to today's webinar. Before we start, I'd like to quickly explain a few features of the webinar software. If you are experiencing any technical difficulties, please refer to the Troubleshooting tab on your screen. Other information can be found under the left or top tabs of your screen. You are able to click on these tabs at any time to view the links or contents during the webinar. Just remember to click on the Slides tab to return to the presentation. Another option is to click on the Pause button to allow you to explore the information under the tabs. This will stop the presentation. However, to resume, just click on the Pause button again. If throughout the webinar you would like to expand your screen, click on the Expansion button. To return to the main screen, click on the Expansion button again. We would like this webinar to be as useful as possible, so feel free to send through questions during the webinar using the question box below the webcam. These will be answered during business hours. You are also able to download a copy of today's presentation, which you will find in the Event Resources tab below the question box. At the end of the presentation, you will be automatically redirected to a survey which will prevent you from returning to the webinar presentation. If you want to go back and look at the material in the Information tabs or review the presentation again, you will need to log in again, but as an already registered listener. If you are interested in applying for the Small Business Rebate, to be eligible you must watch the whole webinar, answer some questions throughout, and complete the survey. A certificate of attendance will be issued to the email address given at registration. This can be attached to your application form. More information on how to apply is provided in the left tab of the webinar screen. I would like to now hand you over to today's presenter, and I hope you enjoy this webinar.
Hi, and welcome to the webinar on managing the risks of working in extreme heat indoors. My name is Paul Covey. I'm an Assistant State Inspector here at SafeWork New South Wales, and I'll be your presenter today. So let's start. There are a couple of important things I should point out about this webinar. The first, that it is about working in extreme heat, which is heat that poses a direct risk to a worker's health and safety. It's not about thermal comfort, which is whether a worker is comfortable at a particular indoor temperature. For more information on thermal comfort, read the fact sheet that is linked to the Resources tab on the left. The second thing is that by watching this webinar, you could be eligible for our Small Business Rebate. I will ask 3 questions during the webinar, and there's a short survey to complete at the end. If you're intending to claim a rebate, you must answer all 3 of the questions and complete the survey at the end. Further information about this rebate can be found under the How We Can Help You tab. Okay, let's get started. Today we are going to discuss how people tolerate exposure to heat differently, heat-related illness, what it is, the increasing warning signs, factors that influence exposure to heat-related illness, the workplace health and safety legislation, and how workers can help protect themselves from exposure to heat-related illness. Our bodies have millions of sweat glands that help us regulate our body temperature. When we get hot, our body perspires, it sweats to cool itself. But how individual workers feel will be different in different situations. It depends on things such as the individual worker, the work they're doing, the clothing and personal protective equipment they're wearing, and the environmental conditions in which they're working. Things like temperature, humidity, and air movement. Optimum comfort for sedentary work is usually between 20 degrees Celsius and 26 degrees Celsius. But workers who do physical work usually prefer a lower temperature range. This is because strenuous physical activity increases the body's rate of perspiration. But when physical activity is done in extreme heat, combined with humidity, particularly with little air movement, sweating becomes less effective at cooling the body, because as the air's moisture content increases, it is less able to absorb moisture from the skin, meaning our body then has to work harder to regulate its temperature. So in simple terms, if a body has to work hard to keep cool, or it can't cool itself down anymore and starts to overheat, a person will begin to suffer from heat-related illness. So what is heat-related illness? The term describes a range of progressive heat-related conditions that occur when the body is having difficulty maintaining a healthy temperature. It used to be known as heat stress. Heat-related illness starts with mild symptoms or warning signs that can increase to severe symptoms if left untreated. It starts with dehydration, from increased sweating and to not drinking enough water, where the person can experience mild to severe thirst, dry lips and tongue, nausea, feeling hot, weak and tired, a flushed face going red with clammy skin, headache and irritability, loss of concentration, poor judgment, confusion, clumsiness and slurred speech. It's important to note that heat-related illness exposure incidents can be underreported because these early warning signs may be blamed on other things. For example, workers feeling unwell or tired. Further symptoms of exposure to heat-related illness are heat rash, where the skin becomes irritated and painful, which is shown in the photograph. Muscle cramps from heavy sweating, causing the loss of salt and electrolytes. If untreated, symptoms can rapidly progress to much more serious life-threatening conditions. And herein lies the problem. Once a person is at this stage, their ability to self-assess their own exposure to heat-related illness will be greatly affected. Heat exhaustion is when the body is working too hard to stay cool. The person's thirst is now intense, but they may vomit any water drunk. They may suffer rapid breathing and shortness of breath, fast, weak pulse or palpitations, tingling, numbness of fingers and toes, and visual disturbance, dizziness and fainting. And the final stage of heat-related illness is heat stroke, when the body actually overheats. This can result in the person having a seizure, losing consciousness, and in extreme cases, even death. The workplace health and safety legislation, which we'll cover in more detail soon, doesn't state a precise temperature at which workers should stop work to protect themselves from heat-related illness. This is because the effects of exposure to heat-related illness is dependent on a number of environmental and personal factors, and all of them can influence a person's exposure. Looking at the environmental factors, of course the air temperature, how hot the air is around you, is a big consideration. But we also need to think about humidity, the amount of air movement, radiant heat, for example from furnaces, ovens, working under a metal roof, workplace building design, layout and or insulation, particularly in non-air conditioned workplaces where hot air or heat comes from the outside. The individual personal factors that may also contribute to a worker's exposure are the type of physical activity and the length of time they're doing it, the amount and type of clothing being worn, as well as the equipment being carried. This includes personal protective equipment, their physical fitness and their general health. Whether the personal and environmental factors occur independently of each other or in combination, they can all impact a worker's exposure to heat-related illness. So each of them should be considered individually. Some people are at a greater risk of heat-related illness. If they're overweight or physically unfit or pregnant, if they've consumed alcohol or drugs or taken certain medications. They aren't acclimatised to working in heat, for example new workers or those returning to work after an absence. Having the flu or a hangover, or suffering from a heart or lung disease. Also, research suggests that workers aged 45 and over have a lower ability to work in hot environments, which can make them particularly vulnerable as the heat intensifies. And young workers under 25 can be more susceptible to heat-related illness due to physically strenuous tasks combined with the lack of skills and experience, and also a reluctance to raise problems with their supervisors. Workers should consult their doctors before commencing work in extreme heat conditions if they are deemed high risk due to pre-existing conditions, or if they've got concerns about their ability to tolerate working in heat. And persons conducting a business or undertaking must have suitable systems in place to ensure any resulting medically ordered work restrictions can be accommodated, so far as reasonably practicable. I'm now going to ask a question for those of you that are applying for the small business rebate. If you're intending to claim a rebate, you must answer all 3 questions being asked during the webinar. So here's question 1. The risk of exposure to heat-related illness is based only on the temperature of the working environment. Is that true or false? Just repeating the question. The risk of exposure to heat-related illness is based only on the temperature of the work environment. Is that true or false? Okay, so let's look at some indoor work environments that can expose workers to heat-related illness. They are usually hot and or humid with little air movement and contain machines and equipment that generate heat and steam. Some common examples are smelters, foundries, steelworks, blast furnaces, commercial laundries and kitchens, as well as dry cleaners. But some less well-known examples include confined spaces, such as roof spaces, vats, silos, and non-air conditioned buildings, used for warehousing, manufacturing, retail businesses, as well as some greenhouses. As you are probably aware, the past few summers have included heatwave conditions, as well as extended periods of very hot weather, with many days, often consecutively, reaching temperatures in the mid-40s in some parts of Sydney and New South Wales regionally. For your information, recent climate data shows that extreme heat weather events are happening more often and for longer periods across Australia, and this is expected to continue with greater intensity in the future, which means that many workers, both indoors and out, will be exposed to increasingly hotter working environments for longer periods. Apart from heat-related illnesses, working in extreme heat can cause or contribute to other problems, such as musculoskeletal disorders, which result from fatigued and reduced strength, sweaty hands, using sudden forces and awkward positions to regain any loss of grip on items. Slips, trips and fall injuries due again to fatigue and fainting, lacerations and other injuries resulting from mistakes or clumsiness, and burns from contact with hot surfaces or substances. I'm now going to ask another question for those of you who are applying for the small business rebate. And remember, if you're intending to claim the rebate, you must answer all 3 questions I'm asking during the webinar. So here's question 2. Can workers in non-air conditioned workplaces be exposed to the risk of heat-related illness? Yes or no? Again, the question, can workers in non-air conditioned workplaces be exposed to the risks of heat-related illness? Answer yes or no. So let's now talk about your responsibilities as a PCBU. The term PCBU stands for a person conducting a business or undertaking, and it includes all individual businesses or organisations that are conducting a business. It's drawn from the legislation. As a PCBU, you have the primary duty of care to ensure the health and safety of workers and others in your workplace so far as is reasonably practical. You must use a risk management process to manage workplace health and safety risks, try to eliminate and then minimise those risks so far as reasonably practical, and consult with your workers or their health and safety representatives at every stage. When necessary, also consult with building managers and other relevant parties. It's more likely that suitable long-term solutions to risks, such as exposure to extreme heat, can be found when everyone works together. Now, central to the success of this process is your commitment to health and safety, including what is reasonably practical. I'll explain what this term actually means in the next slide. The Workplace Health and Safety Regulation has some specific duties in relation to extreme heat. Clause 40 specifies you must ensure, as far as reasonably practicable, that ventilation enables workers to carry out work without risk to their health and safety, and workers carrying out work in extreme heat or cold are able to do so without risk to their health and safety. There's also Clause 209, where you must ensure, so far as reasonably practicable, that any pipe or other part of general plant associated with heat is guarded or insulated so that it is without risk to health and safety to any person. Workers have a duty as well to take reasonable care for their own and others' health and safety, and to cooperate with PCBU's efforts to make their workplace safe. For example, by following policies and procedures, wearing their personal protective equipment, and attending any workplace health and safety training. Okay, the term reasonably practical simply means that you must do the most you can reasonably do to ensure workers and others at your business are not exposed to risk to their health and safety. Cost may be relevant, but you can only consider this after all other factors have been taken into account. So how can you assess a worker's exposure to heat-related illness? Tools are available to assess a worker's risk of exposure. They can be used in both indoor and outdoor workplaces. For simpler situations, Workplace Health and Safety Queensland has developed 2 online tools to assist with assessing a worker's risk of exposure. The easiest one to use is the Heat Stress Basic Calculator that anyone with a basic knowledge of the work area and process can use as a guide to help identify and manage the risks of heat-related illness. The Predicted Heat Strain PHS app requires more detailed information to be entered about the working environment, the work task and the individual worker. It's free to download. For high-risk, complex and/or contentious situations, traditionally we use the wet bulb globe temperature WBGT monitoring to fully assess workers' risk of exposure to heat-related illness. Wet bulb globe temperature monitoring requires the services of an occupational hygienist, and it's done over full work shifts. It establishes a clearer picture of all the environmental and personal contributing factors that can impact exposed workers. The results of wet bulb globe temperature monitoring should be recorded as part of your workplace heat management plan, with appropriate control measures then developed in consultation with workers and/or their health and safety reps. SafeWork New South Wales recommends at-risk businesses develop and implement a workplace heat management plan in consultation with workers and/or their health and safety reps to effectively manage risks of exposure to extreme heat in at-risk indoor workplaces across New South Wales. The plan should detail suitable systems for undertaking regular workplace environmental heat risk indicator monitoring, such as temperature and humidity, and the designated persons responsible. Extra control measures to be implemented in extreme heat conditions, including when they are to be implemented and the person responsible, and identifying situations where formal workplace assessments using wet bulb globe temperature monitoring are necessary. In some circumstances, during the consultation process, agreement may be reached with workers on specific parameters for extreme heat and other conditions when work will be stopped to eliminate the risk of workers being exposed. These should also be included into your workplace heat management plan. So let's talk about how you control the risk of exposure to extreme heat. You must use the hierarchy of controls, starting at the top, working your way through each level to the bottom. The best and most effective risk control is to eliminate the hazard. In existing workplaces, eliminating exposure to extreme heat can be difficult to achieve, but you should consider it and do it if it's reasonably practical. Maybe you could install robotic or automated equipment to remove the need for workers to be exposed to extreme heat, or do physically demanding tasks, or install remote sensors or other technology to identify and monitor environmental problems in infrastructure, for example gas, electricity and water supply, to reduce the need for workers to enter confined spaces. However, eliminating hazards and risks relating to heat, humidity and air movement in new workplaces, as well as existing workplaces that are being renovated, should be central to any design. And I should point out it's often easier and cheaper to eliminate them at the design or planning stages than it is to make changes later when the hazards have become real risks in the workplace. Safe design to address exposure to extreme heat should consider and incorporate good airflow for work areas and hot processes via windows, shutters and roof design. The velocity and direction of air movement, both natural and artificial, including mechanical extraction, ventilation, air conditioning, etc., as well as hot air generated by any plant and equipment. Suitable structural insulation in roof and walls. Suitable workplace layout that does not obstruct ventilation and airflow within the workplace. Considers the selection and positioning of heat generating plant and equipment. Considers whether radiant heat could be an issue. And it separates workstations away from heat hazards, including from direct sunlight. Floor surfaces that are appropriate for the work being done, lighting, both natural and artificial, and drainage. The Safe Design of Structures Code of Practice contains more information, and that's listed in your Resource tab. If elimination isn't practicable, then you must go to Level 2 controls. Substitution isn't a common control for exposure to extreme heat. However, you may be able to isolate workers from exposure by installing remote controlled equipment and air-conditioned control rooms, installing suitable insulation to the building and insulating hot surfaces and heat-generating plant, installing barriers for radiant heat sources, separating workstations away from heat hazards. Engineering controls can include installing mechanical extraction, ventilation, air conditioning, etc. in the workplace and ensuring cabins of mobile plant are air conditioned, reducing radiant heat emissions by installing reflective or light coloured shields, cladding or coating to the building's walls, roofing and ground surfaces and other radiant heat spots, providing evaporative coolers or chiller units to relieve air temperature and humidity in extreme cases, for example when working in confined spaces, installing blinds, awnings, screens, window tinting treatment, reflective film and the like to windows and skylights to ensure windows can be opened where practicable, providing desk or ceiling mounted fans to increase air movement, providing mechanical aids to reduce the need for strenuous work, for example forklifts, pallet jacks, conveyor belts, trolleys, and to get the best results, usually a combination of controls is needed. Once you've implemented the higher level controls as much as you reasonably can, then you go to the level 3 controls. The important thing to understand about administrative actions and personal protective equipment is always that they're the least effective controls, and they should only be used to support the higher level controls you've implemented. They also rely on worker behaviour, which is going to require a lot of supervision. Administrative action includes providing easy to access lots of cool drinking water and encouraging workers to drink often. The water must be free of charge, available to drink at all times, not just during breaks, located near each work area, particularly where hot or strenuous work is being done, and separate from toilet or washing facilities to avoid contamination. Providing regular and frequent breaks away from the hot work areas in air-conditioned or cool, well-ventilated areas. And developing safety systems of work to ensure workplace monitoring is done throughout the day, different temperatures, humidity and air movement, adequate monitoring and supervision of workers. All heat generating plant and equipment is regularly inspected, serviced and maintained. At-risk workers are consulted with their doctor before commencing work in hot environments. Workload targets and work rates are modified in extreme conditions. You could use things like job rotation, arranging for more workers to do the job, allowing workers to self-pace, and reducing the length of their shifts, and so forth. Implementing a buddy system so workers look out for one another and are alert for increasing symptoms of heat-related illness. If workers must work alone, ensure they are monitored and they can easily call for help. Ensure uniforms are loose-fitting and made of lightweight, breathable fabric. Modify uniforms or dress codes so workers can remove ties, jackets, stockings in extreme heat conditions. Develop a workplace policy in consultation with your workers, stating what personal clothing can be worn underneath overalls and other protective clothing. Developing emergency procedures, including for providing first aid and obtaining medical care, and providing suitable information and training. I mentioned earlier that heat-related illness exposure incidents can be underreported because the early symptoms like headaches and nausea can be blamed on other causes. So it's important that managers, supervisors and workers are given suitable information and training about the risk of heat-related illness, so that everyone understands how to identify heat hazards in the workplace, how to work safely in the heat, including keeping hydrated, that personal factors increase the risk of exposure to heat-related illness, how to recognise warning signs and symptoms of heat-related illness in themselves or their co-workers, including how to respond to them and when to call for assistance, the control measures you have in place to manage exposure to heat-related illness, and how to use and wear personal protective equipment correctly, including any agreed restrictions on personal clothing that can be worn underneath overalls. Just to demonstrate the importance of appropriate information and training, between 2001 and 2013 in Australia, 13 workers died from working in extreme heat. One of those deaths happened in New South Wales from exposure to extreme heat in a confined ceiling space. Themes that emerged in the relevant coronial inquiries included, in the case of workers with colleagues nearby, there was a failure to recognise the signs of heat-related illness. In the case of workers working alone, they either failed to recognise or act on their symptoms, or they were unable to call for help. And there was a lack of coordination between the parties responsible for workers' safety. Now to get to personal protective equipment, the very last control of the hierarchy. PPE should only be used to manage any risk that is left over after all the other higher level controls have been implemented. Where PPE is provided for workers exposed to extremes of indoor heat, make sure it is suitable for use and approved where necessary. It is made of suitable material or fabric that is designed to keep workers cool in hot work environments. It's comfortable to wear. It's compatible for use with necessary equipment and other PPE, for example goggles and face masks and respirators, and it's task specific where required. Workers exposed to radiant heat use reflective aprons and face shields. Foundry workers use a jacket or other suitable flame resistant material in high-vis colour options to assist with visibility. And that workers are wearing it correctly and they are not wearing more PPE than is required. Be careful that the type of PPE worn doesn't add to the worker's exposure to heat-related illness. For example, heavy PPE can increase the body's heat load. I'm now going to ask the third and final question for those that are applying for the small business rebate. Again, if you're intending to claim the rebate, you must answer all three questions being asked during this webinar. And that question is, to get the best results, usually a combination of control measures are needed. Is that true or false? The question again, to get the best results, usually a combination of control measures are needed. Is that true or false? So let's turn our attention now to workers. Workers have a duty to take reasonable care for their own health and safety. There are a number of things they can do to help guard themselves against getting heat-related illness, including commencing work well hydrated to provide a buffer against the development of dehydration, drinking water regularly while working to maintain adequate fluid replacement, never replace drinking water with coffee or energy drinks, eating regular meals and snacks to help replace salt and electrolytes lost through sweating, never drinking alcohol or taking drugs prior to or at work, and never coming to work with a hangover. always using the mechanical aids provided, taking their rest breaks in areas provided, and removing unnecessary personal protective equipment during the breaks, for example gloves, aprons, etc. And reporting any problems or incidents immediately. The WHS regulation states a worker may cease or refuse to carry out work if they have a reasonable concern that the work would expose them to serious risk to their health and safety, emanating from immediate or imminent exposure to a hazard. Trained health and safety reps also have the power to order work to stop if they deem the risk is so serious that it's unreasonable to address the issue via the usual workplace consultation process. Any worker who ceases work due to their reasonable concerns must notify the PCBU that they have ceased work as soon as practicable, unless the worker ceased work under direction from a health and safety rep, and remain available to carry out suitable alternative work. So we're now at the end of the webinar. Let's quickly recap on the things we've covered today. We all tolerate exposure to heat differently. Heat-related illness describes a range of progressive heat-related conditions with increasing warning signs, and it can be fatal. A number of environmental and personal factors can influence a worker's exposure to heat-related illness. PCBUs must use risk management and the hierarchy to manage and control exposure to risks. At-risk workplaces should develop a workplace heat management plan, and we've also talked about how workers can help protect themselves from heat-related illness. Thank you for joining me today. I hope you've learnt some new things that you can use to help manage risks associated with working in extreme heat indoors, as well as protect your workers from heat-related illness. Before you go, I'd like to let you know that there's a wealth of Safe Work New South Wales and other information linked to the Resources tab on this webinar. Feel free to have a look at some of those links, and if you'd like to ask a question or request assistance or advice, please don't hesitate to contact us. Just use the question box on the left of your screen to type your inquiry, and we'll email an answer directly to you within a few business days. Or, alternatively, you can call our information centre on 131 050. That's 131 050, Monday to Friday, 8:30 till 4:30. And also don't forget, by completing the 3 questions during the webinar and the survey after this webinar, you may be eligible for a small business rebate. Okay, I'm done. Thanks very much for listening, and enjoy the rest of your day.